How's it going? Hopefully you are getting super excited. I tried to make a whole bunch of introductions for you to start you getting started on the process of kind of talking to interesting people, building up the knowledge base, and ultimately starting to capture some interesting stories. So what should be happening for you over the next week or two is that you start kind of holding a few interviews. And one of the things to remember very quickly is that a great book is going to have probably at least 15 or so interviews that you've done and extracted stories you can include in your book. So hopefully we've got you started with a few interviews. Hopefully those lead to a few more. But the goal, remember, between now and kind of the end of winter break is really to have done about 15 interviews. So we're going to tee some of those up. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to wind up getting more interviews. But today I wanted to start you with a little bit of a kind of a lesson on how to do great interviews, because at the end of the day, when you talk to someone, you want to get really great data. So let me start by sharing this. Right, at the end of the day, all of these people you talk to are going to have a challenge for you, because essentially what you're going to be doing is you'll be talking to really smart people who know something about your book, but they are going to want to give you their opinion. And what you'll see is that you don't actually care that much about their opinion. You already sort of know what their opinion is. Instead, what you want to capture is their stories. And why does this matter? Well, great books are essentially just a collection of stories. What you're going to find is you're going to be writing up probably 30, 40, 50 stories that you find, you read, you hear over the next few months. And so what happens when you interview someone is they're going to say, hey, tell me about your book. You're going to be like, oh, okay, my book's about X. And they're going to be like, oh, cool, well, here's my opinion on X. And you're like, great, I sort of already knew that, or I knew something like that one. Instead, what you want them to get to tell you is like, oh, interesting, let me tell you about an example or a story or a time where I heard something like this or something like this happened to me. So the challenge is that you're going to get a lot of opinions. You're going to want to keep pushing on your interviews until you get stories. And so you should go in with kind of a mindset of saying, listen, I want to hear your opinions, but then you want to really transition them into stories. So here's why this is so challenging, right? When you talk to someone, most people think that that's what you want to hear. They think that, hey, I'm being interviewed, that you want their opinion, which in some ways you do, but more importantly, you really want to get their knowledge that you can do. So the second thing is that when people give their opinion, it makes them feel smart. So, hey, this is my opinion on something, you're someone who's listening to it, great. The third reason is it's very easy to talk in generalities. It's much harder when you ask them to get specific on tell me a story. And most people, frankly, just don't push them on it. So this is the challenge for you, is you're going to walk into these interviews and people are going to want to say, great, what do you want to know? And you're going to basically say, tell me what you think about X. And they're going to say, this is my opinion on X. This is what I think about X. And you're going to say, great, I want to hear a story that you've had that's experienced to you or you've seen before. And so that's going to be the challenge, is to understand that to do a great interview, you want to capture stories. So this is kind of the secret, right? The secret to successful interviews is this, and it's going to be a little surprising, but I think you'll find it promising when you know it. Don't tell them specifically what your book's about. I know that seems sort of crazy, right? Is that like, in some ways I've introduced people to you, or you have these things and they know you're writing a book. And so the first thing they're going to know is they're going to tell me about your book. And what I want you to do is I want you to resist that. I want you to resist saying, hey, here's what my book's about. Because once you sort of show your cards and say, here's what my book's about, they're going to give you opinions on it. Versus saying, listen, I don't exactly know yet. It's early. I'm sort of kind of exploring things. I would love to hear sort of your insights and experience in the space so I can learn. So here's the secret. Don't start out by sort of telling them all about your book. Start out by saying, listen, it's early. I don't quite know yet, but I'm anxious to find out together. So the approach that I want you to think about is this. This is the key thing, sort of the magical thing I've seen when I've been helping people come up with ways to be effective at interviewing. These three things: person, story, solution, the 30% rule, and the write out 1, 2, 3. These are the three things. So if you remember nothing from this one, remember those things: PSS, 30% rule, and write out 1, 2, 3. All right. So here's the first thing, right? When you're interviewing them, what I want you to be thinking about is sort of a loose structure. I'd love for you to have sort of something written out that's kind of bullet points, not necessarily like a script per se, but bullet points. And this is the ordering. The first thing, person. Get to know them, right? Ask them questions about, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself. What's your background? Where'd you come from? Why do you do these sorts of things? Flattery like that will build trust. So you're going to spend probably the first 10% of the time, just asking them about their background, that sort of thing. And the reason is that people like to talk about themselves. It makes them feel good. It kind of warms them up. From there, you're going to start to transition into their story. So we'll talk about how to kind of ask for stories, but it's things like, cool, can you tell me about a time, or give me a date when this happened, or a specific thing, or you want to really get into the story. So that's the second thing, is awesome, tell me some stories about this, like what do you think about it? And the last thing is, then you can sort of reveal, well, here's kind of what I'm thinking about my book, and to get your opinions on it. But this is the thing, PSS is really important. And so here's kind of the way you organize it, right? If you're kind of writing out a brief script, start out with those introductions, a little bit of where they are, tell them how smart they are, super great to meet you, Erica said really nice things, or I heard really nice things about you, whatever it is. And then get to know them. And then here's the way you can introduce your book without over-exploring. So listen, here's what inspired me to explore this topic, and then go into, but it's super early, I'm not exactly sure where it's going to go yet. So then you can ask them for their worldview. So why don't you tell me a little bit about what you think about X, whatever your topic is, and then start asking for specific examples. Cool. Well, what's a specific example or a story that you've seen when this happened? Kind of go in that one, and that's going to take the bulk of it, number 5. And then at the end, you're going to kind of end up with, who else should I talk to? Now, you can get some great follow-up interviews when they can kind of reveal someone else, but part of the reason to do that is you really got to make sure the interview is a success for them. They feel good about it. Now, again, part of the things when you're thinking at the start about this kind of brief introductions and why it works is you really want to make sure that you kind of position this as a teacher-student mentality. You want to sort of help them know, like, listen, you're so smart in this space, I'm really just looking to learn from you. If you do that, you're going to wind up being much more successful. That's part of the trick. So being humble and not trying to sort of show off. Interviews like this fail when you come in saying, like, I'm an author, let me tell you how smart I am, as opposed to saying, listen, you're super smart, I'm just learning. And that kind of positioning yourself as a little bit of a student and them as a teacher helps with the humility, helps with the flattery, and ultimately will get them to teach you and kind of open up a little bit. Now it is kind of important to get to know them a little bit beforehand. So if you can do a little light research, understand a little bit of stuff, and try to focus them on things that you can't just read online. Ask about what it was like to grow up. How did they get inspired, and those sorts of things. And then again, I think the important thing is to transition into your story very briefly. Here's what inspired me to explore this topic, and then ultimately kind of end with, but it's super early, I'm not exactly sure where the book goes yet. Again, remember, you don't want to be sort of giving them the opportunity to opine on your book. You want to basically say, I don't exactly know where this goes. Now, asking for their worldview is a great way to start. It can kind of get them talking, get them to explore, how do you think about this, what's your take on, what makes you excited, what gets you nervous, those sorts of things. And then the hard part is the stories and examples. This is where you're going to really, really have to work. Now, the phrases I've seen that can be helpful, and I would recommend you write these down, take a picture of this, screenshot it, is to use these type of lead-ins. Tell me about a time. That can be a good way because it forces them to think about a specific time and place. Do you have a specific example of that? What's the period when they thought about it? Walk me through. What was an example of? Say more. And then what's the most fun, most interesting, most challenging experience you've had with X? What all of these questions are designed to do is get them to talk in stories, not in opinion. So use these sorts of things. I recommend you write these out, have them on a sheet of paper so you can go back to them, because sometimes interviews might not go the way you want. That's what you should be doing, is trying to pull out these ones. And again, a great interview winds up with 1 to 3 stories that you can incorporate in your book. So be thinking in that. That's what's important to know. And at the end, always end with an ask. This was super helpful. Really great to meet you. Anyone else that I should speak with? Now, the other rule of thumb that I would tell you to do, and again, I recommend you have a sheet of paper out when you're doing this. Do your interviews in a way where you're basically on the phone with them, on speakerphone. You're sort of capturing the interview with a recording on your laptop, maybe taking some light notes, but write out a piece of paper and basically kind of be asking those questions. Go back to those sorts of things of what are the things you want to ask in terms of story building. But if you start to find yourself talking more than 30% of the interview, you're losing, right? You're not getting the stuff. You want to be having them tell you stuff as opposed to the other. So write that rule down, and if you find yourself talking a lot, kind of go back to this as a test. Now here's the last thing. The very secret weapon I found in doing this is on that sheet of paper, I recommend that you have You write out the numbers 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Write them out 3 times. Now, write it out twice. What you're going to be looking for is this is basically the magic sheet of paper that you're going to be looking to capture 3 good stories and 3 good quotes. So in your note, when you hear a good story, quickly write that down summary. Like when they told me the story about their experience at a baseball game, write that down, baseball game, right? Check that one off, you got 1. If they tell another story about something growing up, if they tell another story about a work story, you're done, right? And if you hear particularly good quotes, write the note down a little bit, or maybe the time that it happened, whatever it is, can be a good way to go back. Now, keep that piece of paper there and don't stop talking to them until you have 1, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 3. That's the secret weapon. What I found is that if you kind of let them off the hook without getting those things, you'll be disappointed in what you got. So 1, 2, 3 is the secret weapon. And if you ever get stuck, right, they keep giving you opinions, ask them if there's a date, right? Like, if you find that there's a date that this thing happened, it's more likely to be a story. So can you say, when did that happen? That can sort of be a key thing to know that there's a story. So if they give you an opinion, say, great, when did that actually happen? What was the date on that one? Then you know that there's probably a story associated with it. So again, how do you do this? How do you capture this and record it? What I found is sort of the easiest way is to, if you can, try to do either a video call, a Skype call, or some way that you can get them on screen. That's the best. If not, and you can record it usually in Zoom or in a video chat. It's pretty good way. If not, my recommendation is to use your cell phone and sort of record, do it on speakerphone and then record it in QuickTime on your laptop or whatever kind of recording tool. And then if you do want, sometimes you can use an iPhone or Android recording tool. It's up to you, but probably the most common one is number 2, where you use your speakerphone and record the interview on your laptop. That's probably the most common approach. Again, what you can do is you can sort of start to transcribe some of the content. I wouldn't recommend it for a full interview. I'd recommend you listen to it again if you want to pull out key snippets of it, but I wouldn't recommend you transcribe the full interview. So after the call, I always recommend take that sheet of paper, look at it, and start to see if you can write any other bullet points down. Sort of try to write things up, see if there's a story, and then ask this question: how would I teach someone what I just heard? Now, remember the other things, right? Always tell someone thank you for the time and feedback. Ask them if they have, in an email, you can ask them if they have any other stories that they think of or that you should chase after. And then always, always, always ask for who should you speak to next. That's a great way. You can land 15 interviews just from the early interviews that you've got and kind of follow up from there. I recommend you track them. There's a lot of different ways people do this. I just call it like a CRM and a spreadsheet, track their name, the company, what time it was, LinkedIn, any of those sorts of things. So just keep track of what you've got. And then, my homework for each of you is whenever you have an interview afterwards, try to write up a summary of each interview or each story. See if you can outline the stories, ask the question, how would you tell someone what you learned? Now, remember, the key thing when you're doing these interviews is people are going to want to tell you their opinion. It's just go in knowing that. And remember, make sure you focus on the 1, 2, 3. Did you get 3 stories? Because that's what we're going to use to put in our book. Pick up any book and look at it, and you'll find that the magical part in any book is the collection of stories. It's not opinions of really smart people, frankly. Like, that's interesting, but it's not going to sort of really help you reveal the magical story. So keep focusing on that one. If you have any questions, let me know, but hopefully these go well. And remember, keep pushing on interviews. The early part right now is really capturing more and more interviews. I'll share a little bit more in another lecture on how to start to get more interviews, but I think start with what you know, start with the people you've already got, the people we've made introductions to already. Start there. Use that as your first jumping off point, and then we'll help you attack a bigger and bigger list from there. So hopefully that helps you.